Chernobyl, corruption, this kind of stuff. But the image really of the country was bad. And then I can tell you why I tell you that, because I have been for 30 years dealing as an EU bureaucrat with this region, and therefore I have been confronted in my daily work with this perception here. So very bad image. Third point, for a majority of the population, there is a deep tie, a profound link between Ukraine and the Russian world. Even if they cannot specify which kind of link, even if people will not tell you it's about the Kiev Rus, 9th century, blah, blah, blah. No, but they say, again, a Russian colony. A lot of people speak Russian. They are more or less the same religion, we believe, and they all are Slavs. So strong link with Russia. This is what will come out instantly. Fourth point, nobody, or very few, I don't exaggerate when I say very few people here, have no clue about the fact that Ukraine has an unbelievable political and economic potential. You see what I mean? And here again, when you look, for instance, at now the EU candidate status, which has been granted to Ukraine and Moldova, and under some conditions to Georgia. But these countries have nothing to do together. You have a country where a few years ago you had about 45 million people, while in the other country you have in Moldova 2.6, in Georgia 3.7 million euro. It's bon. Second point, in Ukraine they produce engines for aircraft, Motorzycht in Zaporizhia. In how many countries in the world do they have this kind of knowledge about such an high-tech? Less than 10. Okay? They produce satellites. You have more people who speak English than here. You have an unbelievable culture, touristic potential. You have not only Odessa and Lviv, as many people believe, but if you go to Kharkiv, now it has been destroyed, but you look at the constructivist architecture, if you go to Zaporizhia, if you go to Dnipro, if you go to all these towns, you have an unbelievable touristic potential. In terms of agriculture, you have the best soil on the European continent, the black soil. It is important not only because I believe that the Ukrainians should be proud of their country, but because if companies here, business people would know what Ukraine is about, they would rush to Ukraine. And therefore, this ignorance about what Ukraine is about, which is, again, prevailing in Western Europe, has a lot of bad consequences for Ukraine. Bon. Now, and I will finish here on the first question on the narratives. Up to 2014, almost nobody in Western Europe knew that since 2004, since the election of Viktor Yushchenko, you had a majority of people in Ukraine who had clearly expressed their wish to live in the kind of society we have here in Western Europe. Almost nobody was aware of that. And between 2014 and the 24th of February this year, less than 10 people out of 100 here knew that Ukraine was at war with Russia for 8 years, between 2014 and 2022. And when I say this does not just apply to the average citizen. It is the same thing for a vast majority of the political class and a vast majority of the so-called intelligentsia in our countries. I may look a bit pessimistic, but frankly, this is what I have met in my daily work for the 30 years I have been working on Ukraine.
But why does it happen? For example, how do the French media call the war of the 2014? Do they say the world war?
A conflict. A conflict or a civil conflict, which is worst, obviously.
Yes.
Some people used to say a civic conflict. Some ethnic Russian-speaking Ukrainians would like to join Russia, and therefore there is a war between some Ukrainian separatists and the Kiev regime. This is what some people said. And other people, those who were a bit more cautious, used to say there is a conflict with some Ukrainian people who would like independence or to join Russia, the separatists, but these people are fed by the Russians. And you had maybe out of 100 people, 2 or 3 people who was telling no, Russia has instigated an aggression against Ukraine. Mm-hmm. But it was an extreme minority. And this, again, I had this in my daily work.
And why does it happen like that? Well, because it's obviously a Russian narrative. Do they read Russian?
First of all, in terms of propaganda, manipulation of the information and disinformation, the Putin regime is extremely efficient. Extremely efficient. What can I tell you? They have, as everybody knows, Russia Today and Sputnik, who is everywhere on the social media, and up to a few months ago on the TV screens. You have a lot of agents d'influence, how would you say in English? People who are paid by the Russian to convey a positive image of Russia. A lot of political leaders. I don't want now to name them because I am registered and I don't want to go to a tribunal, but we know that here. You have a lot of former president, prime minister, ministers here who are paid by Russia, and they basically convey a very positive image of Russia. They say, we have to understand Russia's security concern. Russia has been humiliated by the Western countries since December 1991, since the collapse of the Soviet Union. The prevailing narrative has been Russia has been neglected or humiliated by NATO and the EU since December 1991. Russia has been encircled by NATO. And Russia has to do something to take care of the ethnic Russians, 25 million. And this has been the prevailing narrative. Why? Again, the Russian propaganda, it's not propaganda, it's more than that. It's really an ability to manipulate information and to carry out an ideological war. And they are extremely, extremely, extremely efficient. There is no doubt about that. There is the fact that in Ukraine, you have not developed many efforts to try to promote your image. I remember that when I was there, my last stay between 2016 and 2019, I said a lot of time to some of your political leaders, you should do something to try to improve the image of Ukraine in Western Europe. It's so important for you. You have as well the fact that for many people what matters is business. And it's clear that for many companies, many business people, the main markets in Eastern Europe, on the eastern part of our continent, was Russia. And therefore, they used to say, we should not sacrifice our business links with Russia for the sake of Moldovan, Georgian, or Ukrainian. There is this aspect as well, which has been very important. There are all these elements which, in the end, took us to this situation.
But maybe could we, so it's obviously it's like a wishful thinking and we are just trying to, we are not trying to, make up with the past, but still, in order to prevent something, in order to understand our mistakes, what could be done both in Ukraine and in Western Europe, diplomatically and politically, if we, for example, learn the lessons of the Chechen War, of the Prидnestrovье, of 2008 in Georgia, and 2014. For example, imagine that we know that now this aggression starts, and we can come back in time. What do we do?
My feeling is that you have to develop what we call now cultural diplomacy, namely, you have to find the ways to make your creative industries known in Western Europe. In which way? I cannot tell you. I give you another example. In 2017, I was in Ukraine, and in May, during the Cannes Film Festival, I was reading the newspaper I read every day, Le Monde. And in Le Monde, every day during the Cannes Festival, you had 3 pages on the movies, the films projected. And one day, out of the 3 pages, there was 1 page with 1 article, and the title of the article was Le Bloc Russe, the Russian bloc. Okay? So I start reading the article, and this article was talking about 3 films projected at the Cannes Film Festival. One of the films was Une femme douce of Sergei Loznitsa, the Ukrainian filmmaker. He was included in the Russian bloc. What can I tell you? I don't know how to fight this, but you have to. And Le Monde is, for those who know that who live here, one of the best French newspapers. It's not. They are not at all pro-Russian. They are rather open. But Sergei Loznitsa was included in the Russian bloc.
And do you think they did that? So was it an editorial or was it some partner? I don't know. Was it for example, sponsored by? Could it be sponsored by Russian?
It was not. It was not sponsored by anybody. It was in the newspaper during the festival. The festival lasts 2 weeks, I believe, and each day you have 2 or 3 pages dedicated to the films, the movies. And this day there was 1 page, Le Bloc Russe, and voilà. And no, it's not at all sponsored by. It's just the fact that very few people understand that Ukrainian people have a national identity which has nothing to do with the Russian, that there is an Ukrainian culture and all this kind of stuff. And therefore, it's probably important that Ukrainian people are more present on social media, because now the young people spend their time on social networks, and therefore I guess it is important on the social networks to have on TikTok, on this kind of stuff, to have constantly the presence of people who inform about Ukraine. It's probably important as well to have more cultural events organized in Italy, in Spain, in France, in Germany, so that people can learn about Ukraine. And probably it's necessary for the Ukrainian foreign ministry to really develop, put in place a cultural diplomacy policy to better convey messages about what this country is about. But again, I'm not a communication person. It's not up to me to tell you what has to be done. What I can tell you is that the situation is what I describe. And clearly the situation is totally different if you go already to the UK, to the United Kingdom. It's different. And it's radically different, obviously, if you go to Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, or Poland, or Slovakia, where people know far more about Ukraine. Eh? But in Western Europe, there is a huge ignorance, and the Russian manipulation of information has been exploiting this ignorance to develop their own presentation and view of the reality.
If anything, I would like to invite you to comment and to ask some questions if you have one. Maybe you have some thoughts of what we are discussing now, or you're not agreeing with something, or you're... Yeah, sure.
Ina. Mr. Mingarelli, you know Ukraine and Ukrainians. You've been talking about cultural diplomacy. What is your point of view on Ukrainian identity? What is it for you? Does it exist for you? And what is the role of the language?
It's a very difficult question. Huh? It's a very... No. Alors, what is absolutely clear for me that a vast majority of Ukrainians, I have no doubt about that, as I said, want today, and this for 20 years now, they want to live in the kind of society we have here. That's what I have got from Ukrainians. And this is part of their identity. No doubt about that. They want to live in some kind of liberal democracy where people can speak more or less freely, as here, where people can more or less choose their political leaders, where there is respect for human rights and especially the right of minorities, where if you have a child who is gay, he can live normally, not like in Russia. And therefore, this is for me part of the Ukrainian identity. People who want to be in some kind of an open society, politically liberal, with a social market economy. When I think about Ukraine, that's what comes to my head, first of all. Second point, my feeling is that a large part of Ukrainian people, even the young one, have in their minds the fact that Ukraine, over the last 100 years, have gone through terrible things. From Holodomor up to Chernobyl, going through the Nazi invasion, then the Stalinist repression, and I mean, every 20 years there is something terrible which, boom, falls on this country. And therefore, I have the feeling that Ukrainians have integrated that in their mind. Now, what is the role of language in this? Difficult for me to tell you. Complicated to tell me what is the role of language. I can tell you that the identity of a person cannot be reduced to his language, for sure. Right? But the language is part of the identity. But it's not 100% of your identity.
Do you see any remarkable acts which could prevent this tragedy now from the side of European Union? Could you imagine some actions in this period from 2008 up to 2020?
Oh, yes.
Really prevent this,
It's clear. Not from 2008, but from 1999, from August 1999. From August 1999, when Putin became Prime Minister of Ukraine. 1 month later, 300 Russians killed in explosion in Russia. which was a pretext to invade Chechnya in October. And we know, many people told us, who was responsible for these explosions. Not the Chechens. And then in October 1999, the invasion of Chechnya. And I went to Chechnya, and I saw Grozny, a town of 400,000 people, destroyed. And when I used to say, but they have destroyed a town of 400,000 people, it's just crazy. And many people here used to tell me, but it's a fight against jihadists. I said, but what jihadists? It's like when some jihadists 7 years ago in Paris, they killed a bit more than 100 people. As if, as a reaction, the French had bombed le 11e arrondissement in Paris to fight a few dozen jihadists. That's what happened in Chechnya. And our political leaders did not want to look at this. They continue to add normal relation with a criminal regime. And then we had in 2008 invasion of Georgia. They took over 20% of the territory of Georgia with Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Did you see any sanction, anything from the EU? Nothing. And when I used to say, but what is this? Can we accept this? Well, you know, Saakashvili is a strange guy. Carried out a provocation in South Ossetia. And you know that the Putin regime is a bit worried about the situation of the ethnic Russians in this region. Voilà, this was the way that he did that. He took over 20% of Georgia without any real reaction from the EU. He just set up a discussion in Geneva, the Geneva discussion, who are still going on without any result. Then in 2015, Syria, Aleppo. Russians are bombing not jihadists, they are bombing hospitals, schools, civilian population. All this is documented, but no reaction at all from anybody. Crimea and Donbass in 2014. Yes, the EU reacted. We decided to stop our summits with Russia. We had 2 summits per year. We had 6 meetings per year with the foreign minister, Lavrov. We had a lot of meetings with Russia, and everything was suspended. We suspended as well the negotiation of our new agreement with Russia, bilateral agreement between the EU and Russia, and a number of economic sanctions were taken against Russia. But these sanctions did not harm at all Russia. And Putin continued to be treated and received by our heads of states here like a respectable man with whom we can talk as a strategic partner. That's what the French president used to say between 2017 and 4 months ago. We have to put in place a strategic dialogue with the Putin regime. So to answer your question, Olga, there was what we say in French, un déni de réalité. The political leaders in Western Europe and a large part of the intelligentsia turned a blind eye to what the Putin regime was about, what he did for 22 years, from 1999 up to 2021. Did I answer your question?
Yes,
No.
thank you. And from this, your speech grows my next question. Do you see the perspective that European diplomacy institution opening their eyes will change radically the policies?
Yes,
for
yes.
Europe in
Alors,
general?
to a certain extent, I don't know if it will last for long, but to a certain extent, yes. Because frankly, if you had asked me 5 months ago, do you believe that Ukraine has a chance to get the candidate status to the EU? I would have told you, you can, no chance at all. No chance at all. It happened.
You even told about that in your interview.
It happened. It happened. Yes, but why did I say that? Olga, for 30 years, every time there was a meeting at political level, especially a summit between Ukraine and the EU, we had to draft a joint declaration. So in the Commission, we used to draft the first draft. And every time that we put the EU acknowledges Ukraine EU aspirations, boom! Immediately the French, Italian, the German were on us to tell you cannot put that. You cannot put that. You see what I mean? It was impossible to put, even in the association agreement. I was a drafter of the mandate in 2006. And in the first paragraph of the association agreement, we put a lot of things like that, and everything was cancelled by these member states. It was just not acceptable to put this. You could not use one word, one formula, which could give the feeling that one day Ukraine could join the EU. This was out of question. Out of question. Okay? And it happened. So this means that things can change. But do you need to have thousands of people dying and a country totally destroyed for that to happen? And what will remain of Ukraine after what?
This means that the Western countries didn't see the Russian ingérence, I don't know how to say.
Intervention, influence in.
Like, for instance, in French politics?
It's clear. I mean, very few people see that the Russians have a way to. If you look at the recent presidential election in France, out of the 3 main candidates, 2 of them, before the 23rd of February, were clearly in favor of the Putin regime. Yes. 2 out of the 3. And the third is the one who said we should not humiliate Russia when Ukraine are dying. Okay? You have the answer.
I fully agree with you that the candidate status for Ukraine that has just been given has indeed a very considerable symbolic value given everything that took place during the negotiations on the association agreement, etc. But the fact remains that given the dire situation of war in Ukraine, of war crimes, of genocide, I think this situation that we have now cannot fully be comparable to the long years of the negotiations on the association agreement, etc. And I appreciate, as I say, the symbolic value of, as you very truly say, of something that could not even be imagined in our wildest dreams. But coming back to the here and now, knowing that this is not membership, this is
candidate status, yeah.
We know our neighbors in the Balkan states. I mean, I'm not including Turkey, which is a whole other kettle of fish.
Okay.
Yes, certain French politicians said, and probably with a great deal of reason, that this is going to take
20 years. 20 years.
Yes.
No, I disagree with this totally, because Ukraine has nothing to do, I am registered, but okay, with the Balkan states. You cannot compare Ukraine with the Balkan countries, and say, in the Balkans, they have been candidate for 15 years, and therefore for Ukraine it will be the same thing. No. In Ukraine, if two conditions are met, and I don't know how to meet them, but if two conditions are met, these two conditions are, one way or another, your neighbor leave you in peace. I don't know how to manage to reach this, but voilà, first condition. Second condition, you have a decent level of governance. Decent. Huh? If these two conditions are met, you can join the EU. I will not say in 2 years' time, but certainly not in 20 years, because you have all the assets, the qualities and the elements to move toward the EU far more quickly than all other countries in the Balkans, in Central Europe, and anywhere. You see what I mean?
I agree with you if the situation were objective. But there are other elements. There is the element of the EU, there is the element of the Russian Federation. Would you know, and I'm not comparing the Balkans with Ukraine, but would you agree that Ukraine would never have been offered candidate status now, were it not a ploy during the visit of the 4 European leaders, well, 3 fundamentally, in Kyiv on the 16th of
February.
Last month. No,
June, sorry. Yeah, no.
Two weeks
Draghi,
ago.
Scholz, Macron, and the Roman.
In my view, candidate status was a carrot that was dangled in front of the Ukrainians dying at war, but there was a counterpart. There was a political counterpart. We're giving you candidate status, but you must accept the Italian plan. So it's, to my mind, it is much, much more, let's say, complex, not to say perverse. Ukrainians became, to my mind, Ukrainians became European on the 16th of June of this year because they said no to the Italian plan, no matter what. No?
You may be right. I am not aware of this. I know that there is an Italian plan which has been sent to the UN and to the G7 at least 2 months ago already. But I was not aware that this Italian plan was discussed during the visit of Scholz, Macron, and Draghi to.
That's the point. It wasn't discussed, but it was supposed to be discussed. That's why they went. And had not, again, my personal interpretation, had not the European leaders been taken to Irpin, it would have been discussed and proposed to Zelensky that very day. The conversation lasted forever.
Maybe that's why they invited them to Irpin.
That's why they went. To offer candidate status, they wouldn't even have to go to Kyiv. But I'm very glad they did. They saw Irpin, and there was not one word said about the Italian plan. So why do we have an Italian plan if these eminences go to Kyiv and not one word is said? Is that not curious?
I have no answer to your question. Again, I know that there is an Italian plan which was sent 2 months ago at least to the UN and the G7, to Russia and to Ukraine. I know that the Russian very quickly said, we don't want to hear about that. That's what I was told. Now, I don't know if it has played the role that you are saying. You may be right. I cannot tell you. But again, for me, it's very important that this candidate status has been granted. Symbolically, it's very important for the Ukrainian people, I believe. You can imagine what the reaction of the Ukrainian people would have been if the EU had said, no, you will not be a candidate status. You are fighting, we are fighting to keep our independence, our territorial integrity, and on the other side, they don't want us. So it's very important, in my view, that the candidate status has been granted, and now it will be up to the Ukrainian to use all the assets, the fantastic assets they have, to take over the acquis communautaire, the core body of laws and regulation of the EU, to basically integrate the EU as quickly as possible. And in my view, again, Ukraine has so many assets that you should be far quicker than any other applicant country to join the EU.
Mm-hmm. Keeping everything that we've been discussing now in mind, that Western European countries were ignorant about the Putin's aggression towards Chechnya, towards Georgia, towards Moldova. How do you, and all the discussions that we have now for international institutions, international law, some terms that maybe are not quite okay to describe this. So a friend of mine who's historian, he told a very interesting insight that we cannot, for example, talking about Ukraine, this war, we cannot talk in the context and in the terms of the Second World War, because it's another type of war, it's another type of society, it's another type of everything. But we still live in the post-war world, which is now, I think, ended with this new war. Or maybe it ended earlier, I don't know, maybe with some other war it ended. But how do you think, are the societies, the political elites ready for a discussion, for maybe reconsidering their principles and their terms? Maybe something doesn't work, and the Ukrainian war showed that.
That's clear.
Will they do that?
Yes, they have already started. If you look, for instance, at the NATO summit, which took place yesterday and the day before, in the 2010 NATO strategic concept, Russia was a partner. In the strategic concept adopted yesterday in Madrid at the NATO summit, Russia is a direct threat to the Euro-Atlantic area. This has changed, clearly. In the EU, look at what Germany is doing. Even the Germans understand that it's not enough to have a trade and economic cooperation with Russia, but if you are facing the kind of regime we have in Moscow, you have first of all to take care about your dependence on some commodities and energy sources, and you have as well to have armed forces. They have come to realize that. And therefore it's clear that with this Russian aggression, a large part, if not a majority of the political elite in Western Europe understand that, first of all, it's no longer enough to say our international order is depending on international law, because people like Xi Jinping, Putin or Erdogan could not care less about international law. It's not enough to repeat, as we used to did in the EU, we are strongly in favor of multilateralism. Multilateralism. What the UN is about, what the OSCE is doing. Multilateralism. And what is the consequence? If you are in a world with a lot of autocrats, people who just understand balance of power, you have to talk about your strategic autonomy in terms of industry, technology, resources, and defense. And I believe that that's what the kind of reflection that the Russian aggression has triggered in Western countries over the last few months. Yeah.
As a Ukrainian here during the last 3 months, I saw big sentiment and cultural connection with the Russian culture, and involving the French have a very wide cultural practice, and it's a normal life for every family to visit theater, exhibition. It's lack of these practices there is in Ukraine. But anyway, coming back to cultural diplomacy, to make Ukraine visible like a valuable culture on the map of Europe.
Yeah.
What you can see about three maybe steps in cultural diplomacy, like a job to be done from Ukraine side and from EU side to meet each other?
Alors, on the Ukrainian side, again, if I could advise Ukrainian leadership, I would say, find the way to be far more present on the social media, the social network. Your interest and your views of the European continent, the international order, Ukrainian culture, and so on. This is something which has to be done for sure. Bon. Second point, try to be more present in cultural events in Western Europe. How? In the EU, for instance, we have a program called Creative Europe, which is funding a lot of creative industries in the EU and around. Try as well to be more involved in exchange programs, which are funded by the EU. Erasmus for the students, Horizon for the academics and the researchers. Ukraine is not very much involved, not as much as it could be in this kind of programs. You have, I remember when I was dealing, for instance, with the Middle East, a country like Israel is everywhere in Horizon program, in all research programs. Ukraine could do things like that because you have researchers in so many areas, and but you are not present. And it's up to the Ukrainian government to ensure that you are more involved in all of these things. This is something which has to be done. What else?
You mentioned already this Erasmus program, and what do you think about education vector of or field which can help this story from the point of education? What could be done from this point?
But as many Ukrainian students as possible should be sent for 1 year, for 2 years to Western Europe. This would be a way to promote what Ukraine is about. When in Western Europe they would realize that the young Ukrainians speak English and French far better than we do, they would understand that Ukraine is not an underdeveloped country. You see what I mean? So try to get involved as much as you can in the exchange program for students, for academics, for researchers, for creative industries, for people who are working, living in the cultural area. This is something important without any doubt. Try as well to promote your presence in media in France. How difficult for me to tell you. I'm not a communication man, I told you. I was a bureaucrat, so I cannot tell you, but you have to do something because the Russians are very present. And therefore, it's clear that when I hear every day now French or Belgian or Italian TVs or radios, and there are discussions about Ukraine, you have a majority of people who still repeat the Russian propaganda in their way. There is not a week where you don't have an article in a French newspaper coming from a former minister explaining that Ukraine has been humiliated since the collapse, Russia has been humiliated since the collapse of the Soviet Union by NATO and by the EU.
Do you think that Poland and Lithuania, and Poland maybe the most because it's bigger and its economic growth was like very big through the years, the last years? Of course, there are a lot of questions to the government, but is Poland more visible in the EU? Could, for example, in the future.
Now, yes, Poland is more visible in the EU because everybody knows that they have got more than 2 million refugees. It's fantastic.
But before that, for
The
example.
problem is that obviously they accept Ukrainian refugees, but they don't want to hear about refugees which are not white and who are not Christian, which is a problem. And in some areas, they don't want to hear about gays or lesbians, which is another problem in Poland. But, okay, since the beginning of the Russian aggression, Poland obviously had a very important role, and it's clear that, in my view, it has a bigger, a more important political profile in the EU. There is no doubt about that. And now that Ukraine has a candidate status, I believe that the center of gravity of the EU will move toward the east. Because up to now, the center of gravity of the EU was very much between Germany, France, Italy, these countries. But if Ukraine now, as a candidate country, and I hope after some kind of ceasefire, manage to become a more important player, it's clear that the center of gravity of the EU will move toward the east, and Poland will be at the center. What I believe is that it will no longer be possible for Western Europe to go back to business as usual with not Russia, but the Putin regime. As long as the Putin regime is in place in Russia, for Western Europe, it will not be possible to get back to the former situation, to business as usual. Because everybody now is aware of the fact that they have been committing war crimes, to say the least. Okay? If and when the Putin regime is no longer in place in Moscow, what can I tell you? For me, it's difficult to tell you. Russia is our biggest neighbor. And if you have in Russia a democratic leadership, okay, alors I know that, I go too far. I go too far.
Great talk. Thank you for your thoughts and questions. Thank you for this evening. And let's maybe have some more informal and with open windows conversation. Thank you.
Thank you to you, and Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.